It started with a cold sky and a colder welcome. Franklin, Indiana hadn't changed much. Same cracked sidewalks, same diner, still offering $2 pie. But the house on Mulberry Lane, my father's house, was different now. It looked like it was trying to forget who built it. The funeral was held in the town's old Methodist church, while my mother's service had been decades ago. But this time, there were no calla lilies or soft hymns. Just Rhonda in black silk, soaking up the attention like a widow in a soap opera, and her two grown children pretending their grief wasn't rehearsed. I stood near the back, hands clasped, watching them cry for a man they barely tolerated. I hadn't spoken much at the service. No one asked me to. That told me everything about where I stood. After the burial, there was a reception at the house. Chase was already talking about turning the guest room into an office. Mindy joked about painting the kitchen something modern. Rhonda caught me near the coffee tray and offered a smile as fake as her pearls. She said, in that syrupy tone of hers, that she hoped I'd find peace with whatever was left over once the estate was settled. I didn't argue. I just nodded and sipped the bitter coffee she poured. Because she didn't know. None of them knew. They were mourning the wrong man. My father had died 14 months ago. Not when his body gave out, but when he handed me the trust papers and told me, let them play their game. When the time comes, you'll already have one. The trust had been signed 15 years ago. Not updated. Not modified. Final. My father didn't believe in second drafts. Not in letters. Not in life. When he remarried, he never told Rhonda about the trust. Maybe he intended to. Maybe he planned to revise it later, after the honeymoon phase faded. But he never did. And I don't think that was by accident. 14 months before the funeral, he called me. His voice scratchy, tired. Said he was ready to talk. He asked me to come home alone. No lawyers. No arguments. Just him and me in the backyard. 2 lawn chairs and the scent of burnt leaves in the air. That's when he told me everything. The trust, the properties, the stocks, the family heirlooms, even my mother's ring, had already passed to me. He spoke without apology. Just facts. He said Rhonda had spent the last decade treating him like an obligation, and her children treated the house like a bank account. He wanted me to let them live out their fantasy until the paper trail caught up. I asked him why he waited so long, why he let them spend years believing lies. He just looked at me and said, you don't always beat people by fighting them. Sometimes you win by waiting. So I waited. I watched their vacations, their renovations, the cars they bought. I listened as they talked about what they'd do with the inheritance. Chase even tried to pitch me on investing in one of his house flips, not knowing he was living in one of mine. I waited while they dug their own hole. And the whole time, the deed sat in my desk drawer, not a symbol of power, but of patience. They sat in the law office like royalty awaiting a coronation. The conference room was bland, beige walls, dusty blinds, a dying ficus in the corner. But Rhonda looked like she was walking into a palace. She wore a pearl-studded shawl and perfume strong enough to fumigate the building. Chase showed up in loafers with no socks. Mindy brought a little designer dog she insisted was emotional support. The lawyer, Mr. Keys, was an old friend of my father's. We'd spoken twice in the last year, mostly about logistics and timing. He greeted me with a nod, then shuffled his papers while Rhonda adjusted her lipstick in a compact mirror. She didn't let him begin right away. She started talking as if the room belonged to her, making offhand remarks about Walter's wishes, how everything should go to family, and how she hoped there'd be no unpleasant surprises. I just watched her. She was already celebrating. Then Mr. Keys cleared his throat and read the will. There wasn't much in it. That's what caught them off guard. A few personal items, a couple of framed photos, a record collection, nothing else. Chase blinked. Mindy looked confused. Rhonda's mouth went dry. Then Mr. Keys turned the page and explained, very calmly, that the bulk of the estate, including all properties, financial accounts, and heirlooms, had been transferred into a trust 15 years ago. An irrevocable trust. In my name. The room turned still, then cold. They didn't speak. Not at first, but you could feel it. That moment when the fantasy shattered and all that was left was air. I didn't need revenge. I just needed it to be over. But it wasn't. Not yet. After the will reading, Mr. Keys and I stayed behind. He showed me the stack of documents he'd been quietly compiling. Loan statements, title searches, credit card charges. Chase had taken out a line of credit against the house. Twice. Mindy had used the estate's name to open an online boutique, failed in 6 months. And Rhonda? She'd refinanced the second property my father left behind, using forged documents. One of them bore my name. That was where the real problem lay. Forging a signature on a federal form isn't just a mistake. It's a felony. And now, everything she'd built, every couch she bought, every chandelier she installed, every photo she posted with the caption "blessed beyond measure," was evidence. Mr. Keys had already filed a notice with the county. Eviction was pending. Charges were likely. I nodded, trying to keep my expression even. This wasn't how I imagined justice. Not a courtroom or a dramatic confrontation. Just quiet paperwork. The kind that hums along in silence until it ruins someone's life. 14 months. That's how long they'd lived in houses they didn't own. Paid for groceries with money that wasn't theirs. Planned vacations on my father's savings. And now they were about to learn what my father already knew. You can't build a future on fraud and expect it not to collapse. It was near the end of that long meeting, just as I was preparing to leave, that Mr. Keys pulled a small black box from his desk drawer. "I was instructed to give this to you," he said, sliding it across the table. "Your father was very clear about it. No one else was to know it still existed." I opened it slowly, expecting something symbolic. Maybe a tie clip or an old key. But inside was a ring, delicate, worn, unmistakable. My mother's wedding ring. I hadn't seen it in over 30 years. After she died, I remember my father kept it in his bedside drawer. I used to sneak in and look at it sometimes when I missed her too much to sleep. I thought maybe he'd buried it with her. Rhonda once claimed it had been lost in the move when they remodeled the master bedroom. I didn't believe her, but I didn't argue. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing how much it mattered. But he hadn't buried it. He'd hidden it. Mr. Keys said my father brought it to him years ago, wrapped in a handkerchief, accompanied by a one-sentence instruction. "This belongs to my son and to no one else." I held the ring for a long time, longer than I probably should have. It was small, almost too delicate for my fingers, but it carried a weight that had nothing to do with metal. I could see the etching on the inside of the band. June 12th, 1971, their wedding date. My mother used to spin it around her finger when she was nervous. She'd do it when she was thinking, too, the way some people tap their pens or bounce their knees. I hadn't thought of that in years, but now the image returned, whole and clear, like it had just happened yesterday. There was no one left to show it to. No one who'd understand. I left the office with the ring clenched in my fist, not in my pocket. I walked the long way back to the motel, past the pharmacy where my mom used to buy her hand cream, past the ice cream shop that still had her favorite flavor, butter pecan. Places she once stood, places now empty. I realized then that this wasn't just about inheritance or property or proving anything to Rhonda. It was about restoration, about reclaiming what had been quietly taken, not just from me, but from her, my mother, whose memory had been pushed to the edges of that house like old furniture too outdated to match the new decor. That ring wasn't a gift. It was a promise, one my father had finally kept. He was already fading when I got there. It was early autumn, leaves brittle, sky low, air just starting to shift from warmth to warning. He sat on the porch in a weathered recliner, a blanket over his knees, oxygen tube in his nose. The backyard looked the same as when I was a boy, but smaller now. Or maybe I was just bigger, older, finally seeing the whole picture. We didn't talk about the past, not really. He didn't apologize, and I didn't ask him to. I think we both understood there wasn't time for all that. What he gave me instead was the truth. And that was more than I expected. He said he married Rhonda out of loneliness. He didn't sugarcoat it. "Your mother died, and I didn't know what to do with all that silence," he said. "Rhonda filled the house with noise. And for a while, I thought that was enough." He said she changed after the wedding, stopped pretending, treated him like furniture. Her kids called him Walt to his face and the old man behind his back. He wasn't bitter when he said it, just tired, like someone finally putting down something they carried too far. "I let them think they had the upper hand," he said, adjusting the blanket. "Let them spend. Let them talk. But I knew where the real papers were. You were always the plan, Dean. I just didn't know how to say it." We sat in silence after that, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Then he reached under the cushion and pulled out a small spiral notebook, the kind you'd find at a gas station. Inside were names, dates, passwords, account numbers, even storage keys. His entire paper trail. He handed it to me like a mechanic passing off a wrench. "I didn't always know how to be your father," he said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "But I know how to protect what matters." That was the last time I saw him. 3 weeks later, I got the call. "No drama, no hospital vigil." Just a nurse on the line saying he'd passed in his sleep. I didn't cry then. Not really. I just walked out of my apartment and kept walking 6 blocks, maybe more. No coat, no plan, just motion. It hit me later in the quiet. Not for what we lost, but for how long it took to finally speak plainly. And for the strange comfort of knowing he'd been thinking of me, even in silence. The house on Mulberry Lane looked nothing like the one I grew up in. When I unlocked the front door after the formal notice was served, the first thing that hit me was the smell: synthetic candles, pet urine, and too much cologne. The walls had been painted a glossy gray. The furniture looked like it had come from some influencer's showroom. Marble-patterned coffee tables, faux fur throws, ring lights still plugged in. But none of it felt lived in. It felt like a set, a performance space for the life they wanted others to believe they had. I walked room by room, half expecting to hear my mom humming in the kitchen or the sound of my dad's boots on the porch steps. Instead, it was just hollow quiet. They had gutted the house of history. The framed photo of my parents that used to sit on the mantel was gone, replaced by a decorative sign that said live, laugh, love. The garden my mom once kept was overgrown, full of weeds and broken solar lights. In a master bedroom, where my parents once slept, I found mirrored nightstands and a chandelier. The closet was still half full, designer labels, tags still on them, shoes lined up like they were staging a boutique. I didn't touch anything, just stood there breathing through it, letting the anger come and go. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, maybe something they couldn't fake. But everything here was surface, expensive, curated surface. Nothing that could anchor you to a memory, except for the basement. It was the only part of the house they hadn't touched. Probably thought it was too dark, too low to film in. But for me, it was the closest thing left to home. My dad's old tools were still hanging on the pegboard. A dented radio from the 80s. A red stool I remembered sitting on when I was 7, watching him fix a toaster. There was dust everywhere. Cobwebs. But it was real. I sat on that stool again, not for long, just enough to feel the years wrap around me. Just enough to remember that this house wasn't about walls or roofs or appraisals. It was about what it once held and what it had been forced to forget. They had lived here like it was a trophy, but I had come back to bury it, and maybe quietly to say goodbye. Franklin was small enough that everyone eventually found out. You don't keep secrets in towns like this. They only wait until the right voice carries them. By the time I picked up coffee the next morning at a place that still had a jukebox and a bulletin board full of church bake sales, 3 people had already mentioned what happened over on Mulberry. The first was the cashier, who didn't meet my eyes, but said, heard there was some kind of legal mix-up. Shame. The second was a man I didn't recognize who said, about time someone set Rhonda straight. The third was the pastor from the funeral, who nodded at me with something that looked like guilt. They all knew, or thought they did. Word was spreading. Rhonda hadn't inherited anything. That Chase and Mindy were being evicted. That the house never belonged to them. I knew how quickly these stories became entertainment in a place like this. Gossip was the real local currency. Not cash, not crops, not even family name. Just stories, traded and reshaped until they sounded like fables. Some people looked at me with pity. Others with something that bordered on admiration. No one said it to my face, but I could feel it in their pauses, and how they waited to see if I'd say something, clear the air, confirm the scandal. But I didn't. I let them talk. Let them piece together their own version of justice, one cup of diner coffee at a time. Meanwhile, I heard Mindy had deleted all her social media. Her coaching business was gone. Her followers realized the rented car, the rented furniture, the fake partnerships. All of it was part of the same illusion. The final blow came when someone leaked screenshots of her text begging an old boyfriend for a place to crash, just for a few nights. Chase tried to sell a rental property he never owned. Once the title search exposed the lie, his license was flagged for review. By then, his reputation, built on showmanship and short-term loans, was already crumbling. And Rhonda? She retreated behind her curtains. I passed the house once and saw her peering out through the blinds like a ghost guarding a kingdom already lost. They had paraded themselves as winners. Now there were side notes and a story they didn't write. It happened on a Tuesday. Cold, flat sky. Wind biting the back of my neck as I crossed Main Street. She stepped out of the boutique like she owned it. Rhonda, in a long beige coat with oversized sunglasses and heels that clicked louder than her words ever had. She saw me and froze for a moment, then smiled like nothing had changed. Like it was still her show. She walked straight up and said, "We need to talk." I didn't answer. She gestured to the bench near the courthouse, like we were just two neighbors catching up on a slow afternoon. I sat because I was tired, not curious. She launched into it immediately. Said she'd been misled, that my father never explained the full situation, that she'd been blindsided. Her voice still had that syrupy polish, but underneath was panic, the kind you can't fake. She asked me to reconsider, said the house meant a lot to her, that she'd put her own touch on it, that Chase and Mindy were just kids and didn't deserve this kind of public shaming. Then she leaned in, real close, and whispered, "I know we've had our differences, Dean, but we're still family." That was the line. Not the lies. Not the forged signature. Not the decade she spent pretending I didn't exist unless she needed something from my father. It was that word, family, dragged out like a rope she thought she could pull me back in with. I looked at her, and I saw what my father must have seen for years. A woman who never thought the rules applied to her, who wore grief like jewelry, smiled through betrayal, and believed charm could undo truth. I told her there'd be no deal, that the house wasn't hers, never was, and the trust wasn't negotiable. "You've had 14 months, I said. "That was your grace period." She didn't argue. Not really. Just stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not as an obstacle, but as someone she couldn't move. And then she said it, the thing that finally made her human for a second. "I don't know where we're going to go." I could have said a lot, but I didn't. I just stood up, nodded once, and walked away. The auction was quiet. No signs, no drama. Just a plain white notice on the courthouse board, a list of assets, and a Tuesday morning when bidders with checkbooks and clipboards showed up to scavenge what was left of their dream. I didn't attend the whole thing. I watched from my car across the street for a while, not out of curiosity, but responsibility. I felt like I owed it to the house, to what it used to be. I didn't want to watch vultures circle, but I couldn't pretend I didn't care. They sold the patio furniture first, then the wall art, then the chandelier that hung in what used to be my parents' bedroom. Every piece of curated fiction was hauled out and loaded into trucks. Someone bid on a mirror shaped like angel wings. Another man took home the sound system Mindy had installed for her yoga clients. I didn't bid on anything. I didn't need reminders. The only thing I wanted was already in my pocket, the ring. And maybe the feeling that came with it. Something real, small, quiet. A memory that didn't need an audience. The house was stripped bare by noon. Left behind were coffee rings on counters, a broken curtain rod, a pink sticky note still stuck to the fridge that read, "Don't forget to manifest today." I walked through one last time. Not to claim anything, just to see the bones. It was lighter now, emptier. It didn't hurt as much. In the garage, tucked behind an old shelving unit, I found my dad's tackle box. Rusted shut. Inside were hooks, line, weights, and a photo of me at age 12, holding up a catfish with a sunburned grin. I took the photo, not for the picture itself, but for the proof that we had good days once. Not many, but enough to mean something. Later, I asked Mr. Keys to donate anything left behind to the local shelter or Habitat for Humanity. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want souvenirs. I just wanted it done. That night, back at the motel, I slept without waking. First time in weeks. And in the morning, I didn't feel heavy. Not hollow, either. Just done. Like the past had stopped calling my name. The ring sits in a small dish by my bathroom sink now. I don't wear it. Wouldn't fit even if I tried. But I see it every morning when I brush my teeth, every night when I wash my hands. It's not just a reminder of my mother. It's a tether. Proof that something survived. The trust is closed. The eviction is final. The charges? Still pending. I don't follow the case anymore. I left that to the lawyers and the timeline my father built before his body gave out. The machine of consequences is slow, but relentless. I've learned not to hover over it. I went back to Chicago. Took a few weeks to clear out my apartment, then moved to a smaller place near the lake. I kept my practice, scaled it down. I don't need much these days. A quiet desk. A coffee shop where no one knows my name. Mornings with fog on the water and no expectations. I still think about the house sometimes. Not the version they ruined, the real one. My mom's humming. My dad teaching me how to cut drywall in the garage. Birthday candles. The dull sound of lawn sprinklers at dusk. And I think about the man my father could have been, and at the end, maybe was a man who made mistakes, yes, but also a man who tried to fix them, even if it was too late for an apology. There's no satisfaction in the way it ended. No cinematic final blow. No dramatic courtroom scene. Just quiet closure. The kind that comes not from punishing others, but from releasing yourself. Sometimes I wonder what they tell people now. Rhonda, Chase, Mindy. Do they rewrite it? Say they were scammed? Say they were blindsided by legal tricks? Maybe. I don't really care. Let them tell it however they need to. That's the final mercy I didn't know I was capable of. I don't need them to lose loudly. I only needed to walk away standing. And I did.